hello and welcome to Until All Are Free. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, which I think is going to be a little bit of a different one for our audience in that, we at the Exodus Road had a chance to participate recently in this big to us like documentary moment where we get to talk at a nationwide level about what we're doing in this fight alongside others that we just have like such utmost respect for. And I thought it might be fun today to bring in our CEO, Laura Parker, who is also featured in the Newsmax documentary. We thought we might do a bit of a watch party. So if you're listening to this right now, just so you know, we've got this on video. So take a look, go to our podcast website, which is in the show notes, and you can watch along. If you're on Spotify, maybe you're already watching video there. But I want to welcome you, Laura. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited, Preston.
Yeah. Laura, tell me just before we dive quite in, tell me a little bit about why this is such a meaningful project for you to have participated in.
Yeah, it's such a big deal. I think when Matt and I first started the Exodus Road almost 15 years ago, we were talking to each other only, at our kitchen table about the horrors of human trafficking. And for us, we didn't imagine that conversation would eventually end up on such a huge stage. And obviously, a lot of people have been talking about human trafficking for many, many years before us. But I think for me personally, it was really, really exciting to see the Newsmax documentary come out and to see that it had, 16 million viewership, an audience that large, and that this conversation would be able to reach a potential audience of that size, and that Matt and I and the Exodus Road got to participate in it was just so thrilling and really exciting.
Yeah, I think to add to that, people perhaps on the outside, at least I didn't when we walked through this, do not realize how long of a journey it can be to even get a piece of content like this out the door. And so I think there's this, it was literally years in making in some ways.
Yeah.
Which is just remarkable.
Right. And it's morphed over time because our original idea was a little bit of a different documentary, and
right.
You really shepherded all the different iterations of it to where it landed, which was just super, super exciting.
Yeah, I totally. And it was such a great honor to play a role in kind of shepherding that, but then also to get to have a voice in this piece as well. So here's what we want to do today. We want to actually just invite you, if you're listening, to, I know perhaps for some of you this is an audible experience, but I think it's pretty compelling anyways. And so we want to just start. We're going to play kind of the first 2 minutes, and then we're going to dive in together and do a bit of a watch party where we land at different points in the documentary itself to talk about, why did this make the cut? Why is this an important part of the conversation? I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get started.
Let's go.
Drug cartels and syndicates, they're manipulating and coercing people, false promises of coming to the United States and continue their illicit criminal enterprises. Holes in border security, it allows for more criminals to make their way across the border.
Human trafficking is a crime that is really hidden in plain sight.
The industry is a $10 billion illicit industry in the United States alone.
That exploitation can come right into your own homes, right through your kids' smartphones.
Unfortunately, with technology and this battlefield that we have now, no longer do criminals operate within borders. They are global.
The old days of the boogeyman or the white van that may show up, that's not the world that we're in today. They're posing as someone else, they're obfuscating where they are, trying to hide their identity, and they're ruthless. They're financially motivated. Children are their currency.
I hate to make it sound scary, but nowhere is safe. But you really have to have supervision of your children.
Traffickers will pretend to be peers and will connect in whatever environment the child is on.
A lot of people get groomed on online apps. He could tell me everything about my life, so he was looking for me for a long time.
In my mind, I'm thinking, what could he have done that was so horrific that someone would blackmail him?
I served as an undercover investigator into human trafficking crime. My eyes opened up to the burden that was relieved with digital forensics. It will tell you so much more and so much faster.
This person had reached out to Gavin was like, do you have what we talked about? Time is ticking. And that was the last that they heard from her.
We all have digital devices, and all the data is critical evidence because the future of crime is digital.
All right, Laura, so one of the first kind of concepts in the piece, when they came to us and they were like, what do you want to say about human trafficking? The first thing that we really wanted to get right is to just define human trafficking for the general public.
Right, because there's so much, even now, there is still so much misinformation even about the definition of it. And, for us, I think the easiest way to think about it is exploitation of a person when someone else is profiting from that exploitation. I think that's the simplest way to think about human trafficking. There are two schools of thought. One school of thought is that forced marriage is also technically a part of human trafficking. And there's another school of thought that doesn't include forced marriage in the numbers. But essentially, when you think about human trafficking, you think of the 50 million potential victims today. It's people that are being exploited and someone else is profiting or gaining in some way from that exploitation, whether it's labor or that can be sexual services, but that can look like a lot of different things. But essentially, it's labor for someone else's gain.
Yeah, I think people, when we talk about human trafficking, we have this big number in our heads, or it kind of circles in the industry, and it's that 50 million number.
Right.
And I think from the outside, for so many people, and naturally, this is kind of because media has painted this portrait of this is what human trafficking looks like. They assume that's all sex trafficking, individuals experiencing sex trafficking. And the reality is only, about 44% of all trafficking victims fall into labor trafficking, of which sex trafficking is even a subcomponent. And so, it's a highly complex issue. When we talk about it here in the US, there's roughly 1.1 million is kind of the number that we hear often in terms of individuals experiencing it right now in the US.
Right. Yeah, and even that is a misunderstanding, because I think a lot of times people think that human trafficking doesn't happen in the United States, right? They think it only happens in foreign countries, but the reality is that it is happening right here. And for us, that can look like forced labor in the agricultural community, or massage parlors. It can again look, there's a wide gamut of what that can look like. It can look like sex trafficking on street corners and in even online platforms. But it is happening here in our own backyards. And it's not just sex trafficking that's happening here in the United States too.
Yeah, I know it was particularly exciting for us to be featured in this documentary alongside some voices that we have such great respect for. One of them being a man named Bill Wolf, who is currently with Homeland Security investigations in the office of the president at the U.S. level. And I wonder, let's give Bill a chance to just talk briefly about what human trafficking is or isn't in this day.
Human trafficking is essentially exploiting other individuals for the purpose of profit.
In its simplest terms, human trafficking is a crime where a trafficker exploits and eventually profits from an adult or a child through and by the means of either labor exploitation or commercial sexual exploitation. Especially now in this digital area where we're seeing human trafficking moving online, it's really opening up the gamut.
Most people think that human trafficking is a problem that only happens somewhere else. It doesn't happen in our own backyards. But the truth is that human trafficking is a very real and present danger. Estimates are that over 1 million individuals right now in the U.S. are human trafficking victims.
A lot of people think of human trafficking under this idea of force, that we are abducting people, we're locking them in basements, chaining them to beds. The majority of cases that we see, particularly here in the United States, it's coercion, it's manipulation.
All right, so we see and we hear there this definition from Bill. We heard from John at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And I think they provide this kind of perfect lens and setup for this other conversation that became this real crucial one that we wanted to highlight in the midst of the documentary. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that, Laura, and this nature of how the crime has really moved online, what we mean by that, why it's even relevant to the conversation about human trafficking.
Yeah, we started when we started at the Exodus Road about 15 years ago. We only did human investigations. We would have officers that would have to go into a physical location and verify sexual exploitation. And it's so interesting because as we were watching our own data coming from the field with our law enforcement partnerships and our own casework, we started seeing that 72%, 73%, 75% of all cases year over year had an online or social media component.
Yeah.
And it was this trend that we first started seeing and really paying attention to because it came to our own front door. It was happening in our own casework. And so we really started looking at, okay, what does it look like for us to pay attention to the trends and to pay attention to the fact that now online exploitation is really a key mechanism in most exploitation that happens. And most human trafficking that happens, there's some kind of social media or online component. And so that's really where we started looking at, okay, well, how does that intersect and interplay with students and vulnerable populations right here in the United States?
Yeah.
And that's really how we started this process. It was about 4 or 5 years ago that we were looking at our own data and seeing that things were quickly going online.
Yeah, and I want to camp there for just a second and just help people to understand what we mean by even going online, because I think that point of change when we started to see that rise in social media being like a major component of a case, it really made a marked difference, because in the cases that we had worked so often before, you have someone who perhaps enters into human trafficking crime because they're physically recruited, or perhaps they're exploited by a trusted individual in their life, a coach, a mentor, a parent, or a family member in some ways. And so, what we say and what we mean when we say, hey, our cases started to have this online component is the normal everyday social media spaces that we all inhabit, things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X,
Snapchat.
Yeah. They all become this space where actually that initiation point happens, right?
Yeah. The initiation points happens, and even the sales happen. We started seeing in Thailand on what used to be Twitter, we would see openly boys being sold for sale with prices that were being publicly tweeted out. And so I think there is the initiation factor of the online space, but then I think also what we're seeing with the rise of sextortion and some of these other crimes that human trafficking actually happens online too. And we started seeing the rise of
facilitation
web studio,
of it.
the facilitation of it, webcam studios where girls are forced to do live sex acts as human trafficking victims, and they never left one room in one house. So I think that the online component is a really terrifying one, because the scale of the problem all of a sudden starts to just exponentially multiply.
Right. And when we talk about the online exploitation of children in the US and its relevance to like human trafficking as a conversation, is that kind of portrait of like webcam modeling, that kind of stuff, is that what we are seeing a lot of in the US, or what does it look like here in the States predominantly?
Yeah, it can definitely look like that. It can also look like sextortion. So it can look like a 17-year-old that is convinced from an online predator to send a photo of himself or herself. And then that predator, all of a sudden when they get the photo, switches and becomes this person that is trying to blackmail the individual. But then also if that online predator starts to, or oftentimes will sell those images, then all of a sudden they're making money not only from the child himself, but also making money on the sale of the distribution of the image itself. And so, and I think that's what's so tricky about this particular time and space is that our definitions haven't even caught up really with what the crime is.
Yeah.
You know, people still think we were still trying to unpack and get people to understand what physical human trafficking is.
Right.
In, you know, kind of the typical or normative
portrait. Yeah.
And then now we add the online component and which crimes technically qualify as human trafficking and not. And again, it just becomes this really, it takes a complex problem and makes it even more complex when you add the online component.
Well, and you add to it like, you know, the lack of the ability to even like effectively prosecute those kinds of crimes because they're not necessarily like covered or tested in the court of law under typical like human trafficking violations. It's massively complex. And I think, you know, one of the things that has been, of course, like a value at the center for us is to find voices from those who have lived these experiences to try and give standing to this issue and what we mean by sextortion, what we mean by its connection to human trafficking. And I know as we were thinking about, you know, who could we potentially open the door to for their story to be really highlighted in the midst of this documentary, of course, we thought of the guy who's pictured on screen, which is Brandon Guffey, who is a state representative in South Carolina. He is a parental survivor of sextortion. So he lost his son Gavin to it. And I want the audience to be able to hear a lot of their story kind of come through in this podcast. So we'll get a chance to listen. But before we do that, is there anything you want to say about kind of their story and how it has spoke to you?
Yeah. You know, Brandon's story has really impacted me. I think I heard once this quote that said that pain that is not transformed will be transferred. And I really think about that in Brandon's story because it would have been so easy for him to just transfer the pain of the loss of Gavin and transfer that in a lot of negative ways in the world. And yet he has chosen to use that pain to transform laws, transform communities, transform the national conversation around sextortion and the safety of kids and big tech's responsibility in that. And so he is just an incredible inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really there's nothing else that I need to add to that. At this point, let's dive in. I want to give you a chance. Take a listen as Representative Guffey speaks from his own experience.
July 27th of 2022, I was out at a political event. I just won my primary. I still had a general election. I came into the house and it was quiet. Gavin and Cohen had just come back from a Young Life camp. Both of them had COVID, so they were quarantined to their room. And we had Callahan sleeping on the couch, and you can hear Gavin playing video games. And as a dad does often, you know, open the door like, hey, bud, keep it down. Mom's trying to sleep. That seemed like a nightly occurrence. We found out Gavin was playing video games with a friend until midnight, and he jumped off the game and he told his friends, I'm gonna talk to this girl. He had some girl reach out to him on Instagram, and that was the last that they heard from him. Gavin sent out a less than 3 sign on a black screen, just very small, and it was just a heart. And he sent it out to friends just as a way to say, I love you. And this person had reached out to Gavin, and this one comment, Bella Janet 30, was like, do you have what we talked about? Time is ticking. But I learned at that time that he was being blackmailed for something. In my mind, I'm thinking, what could he have done that was so horrific that someone would blackmail him? That this was someone that contacted him on Instagram, started up a conversation. I think the first message was, hey, you're cute, are you in the military? Which if you look at pictures of Gavin, he had this massive head of hair. They began strike conversation, which caused Gavin to get off the video game with friends. So they had sent over pictures, requested pictures, and then as soon as he sent over pictures, they began to blackmail him and tell him that if he didn't pay them, that they were gonna make these go viral. He paid a little bit of money. I think it was $25 he sent out via Venmo, but of course that wasn't enough. But this crime is so horrific, it targets your shame. And I heard Gavin, I kind of seen him leave his room. Something just told me to get up and go check on him. I got up, ran to the bathroom door, yelled his name, didn't hear anything, and I immediately shouldered the door in. So Gavin had just walked into the bathroom. By 1:40 a.m., he had taken his life. At Gavin's funeral, we wanted it to be about him. And Gavin was the type that would never wear a suit. So we had t-shirts made with the Lesson 3 and Gavin's signature Goop on them and passed them out to everyone. We get out there, and as we're doing the burial, it was Callahan, me, and Cohen. And Callahan was the first to put the dirt on the grave. And as we started passing shovels around to allow other men to go about it, Callahan never gave up his little shovel. And I said, "Are you all right, buddy?" And he said, "Yeah, help get the yucky out." And it was one of those aha moments that I just realized that in order to change an emotion, you can create motion. And it was part of the grieving process. We can't save Gavin, but this could save the next kid that's in this situation. I felt a responsibility at that time. Like, we've got to stop this from happening. And I often say the one thing God blessed me with is a big mouth and getting the word out.
Obviously, there's so much to glean from, to hear from Brandon's story and Gavin's story and their family. And I don't want to give the audience too much. We do want you to go and watch it. We do want you, and we're going to tell you all about how you can find it. So if you're like, hey, I need to hear more from that, great. That is the idea. But I want to keep moving forward in this conversation together, Laura, and talk about kind of this opportunity that we had to illustrate the importance of technology in the role of investigations, to illustrate the importance that we feel as an organization still doing human intelligence and open source digital intelligence work as we support law enforcement. And I think one of the things to certainly bring up is the role of our co-founder, Matt Parker, who's also in the film. Do you want to talk a little bit about, just Matt's background and experience and what he brings to this particular piece?
Yeah, I have a strong liking for that one. We've been married almost 30 years now. And we have walked such a long journey in this road of work, and it's been really inspiring to me to watch him continually innovate and continually be on the leading edges of what it means to impact this crime effectively. And, he got his start as a human intelligence operative and did that exclusively really for about 10 years. But it was really in the last 5 years that he has really pressed into what does it mean to leverage technology to more quickly and more efficiently gather evidence. Because the difficult thing about human trafficking crime is that so often it requires the testimony of a survivor. And there's so much complexity in that because so often the survivor is not present at the time of trial, or so often there's so much complexity, the survivors unable to take the stand or unwilling to take the stand, understandably. And so this idea of what does it look like to gather digital forensics evidence and how do we leverage technology to build stronger cases that can actually get prosecutions of human trafficking crime. That was really the problem that he started out solving several years ago when he was working with Cellebrite. Mm-hmm. And I know that he shared about that case before on the podcast, but I think that particular technology is so valuable because it really extracts with law enforcement all the evidence that are on everyone's phones. And there's so much irrefutable evidence on all of our phones. And so this reality, I think, for us is, what we have found is how do we take what we've really spent years and years becoming experts at, which is human intelligence, and how do we marry that with open source intelligence, and
Yeah.
then how do we add to that digital forensics? And all of a sudden we have this triple threat of investigations that is really helping law enforcement cases worldwide.
Yeah. And I think, so often people ask, they're like, well, don't law enforcement have, why do they really need you to do that?
Mhm.
And I don't think that the average person understands just how overwhelmed law enforcement is globally, and what the role is of citizens, which is what we are, to help augment and support that effort. And I know we talk a little bit about that, but tell me a little bit about why is it that 15 years in, the Exodus Road is still very committed to playing that role of really effective citizens?
Yeah, one of our values here is we do hard things on purpose. And it is really a hard space to dig into and to become experts at and to work alongside law enforcement in effectively. And we've really seen that a lot of nonprofits over the years, understandably, have shied away from this part of the work, the intervention part. And for us, we do hard things on purpose. We understand it's a gap of a huge need that law enforcement has globally to find. How do you find and free those who are current victims, those 50 million, and how do you really impact justice systems and the process of that to really impact the crime itself globally?
Right.
And we just, as we were doing an assessment on what's the role that we could fill as an organization, we kept coming back to, okay, this is the point where one of these sectors' greatest needs meets with our expertise and meets with our organizational will to do hard things on purpose. So that's why we're still in the work of supporting law enforcement in intervention cases.
I feel like that is a great tee up to this next section. I want to give the audience this chance to hear from Matt about the role of cyber intelligence technology, like what Cellebrite provides. And Matt is really representing Cellebrite in this piece in a really strong way. And then that'll kind of segue straight into the work that we're doing in the undercover environment as well. So let's take a listen.
I get the privilege of traveling the world to really evangelize Cellebrite's products of digital forensics and how critical those products can be in the fight against crimes. And so more than ever, digital forensics is playing a critical role to identify criminals, victims, the players, and gather the necessary evidence for successful prosecution.
We may receive a tip that comes in, and what we do with that information looks like this. We assign it to our investigative team that is both human intelligence investigators as well as open source investigators that are experts at scouring the online world to find the evidence that they need that human trafficking crime is taking place. And what we do is we develop a comprehensive target package, sometimes utilizing technology from partners like Cellebrite that help us to actually take devices and to mine all of the available data from that device to prove that exploitation is taking place and to explode to the network of individuals involved in that crime. That allows us to build this comprehensive target package that then we're able to provide to law enforcement that compels them to act. It gives them the tools and the evidence that they need to then go to a local prosecutor's office and say, hey, we have this crime, we're ready to move, we're ready to make an arrest, we're ready to intervene. Will this case stand up in court, and can we push this forward together?
So this is what we call our ops room. This is where we support global operations, both here in the United States and in other countries. We use different technologies and software and systems to track our investigators, to support them in real time, using open source intelligence. This is where the action happens.
These are the two women that our team purchased, actually, which were the targets of this operation. They were both having their virginity sold.
We only allowed what we call Delta Blacks, which is our highest level of investigator that would go into the highest risk situations. We want them to be super comfortable with their camera usage, the different types of cameras that they might need to employ depending on the conditions that they're filming in. A lot of what we do in the undercover space kind of relies on being able to be comfortable, act natural, and be seen as just someone that's in the background.
You're getting footage off of body-worn camera. She just got handed a laser. And what she's doing is she's using this laser right there to actually point out the girl that our investigators have been targeting with law enforcement to help pull out of the establishment.
It's a crucial piece of evidence as well.
Yeah.
To be able to show that there's an element of control, there's an element of sale.
Yeah.
And I think later we'll even be able to capture the exchange of money.
And this is the moment when our investigators are sitting with these young women. The alert to law enforcement to enact the raid is about to happen. You have all the parties involved in the sale of these girls together with our investigators. Money begins to be exchanged, and she pauses to mark that she's received the funds for each of the girls. The state marshals enter the premise alongside local police and police dedicated to an anti-human trafficking task force. We have law enforcement actually frisking investigators. We never blow our cover in the undercover setting. We never reveal our true intentions to survivors that we sit with. At this moment, SWAT are actually frisking our guys, which is part of our plan to make sure that their cover's not blown. These two vans were actually coordinated by our team. They were set to carry out what would become 39 women that were removed from this establishment.
The scenes of handing over money, right, to traffickers, but it was marked, and at the end of that investigation, that is not money that goes to the trafficker. Down to those details of, are we making sure that we aren't perpetuating the very crime that we're trying to investigate? Technology's really becoming center stage in global investigations of human trafficking or crimes against children. And the reason is so many crimes, over 90%, involve some digital component, a cell phone, a computer, a chat room. And so more than ever, digital forensics is playing a critical role in cases to identify criminals, victims, the players, and gather the necessary evidence for successful prosecution. I have a unique background because for 15 years I served as an undercover investigator into human trafficking crime. And so I've spent a lot of time on the ground befriending traffickers, learning their patterns of criminal activity, identifying children being bought and sold, where and how much, and then partnering with law enforcement to conduct a recovery operation. And in 2013, I was introduced to Cellebrite. And I had no clue what digital forensics was, and certainly couldn't forecast the critical role digital forensics would play in my own investigations into human trafficking.
Organizations like Cellebrite, who offer forensic tools for law enforcement to be able to go through cell phones and laptops and other pieces of electronics. And as an investigator, for me to manually try to go through that, it would be impossible. So being able to employ some tools, and now in today's day and age, employing AI tools to help sort through and sift through so much data and information that's available to law enforcement officers. That allows them to do the real job of supporting the victim and arresting the suspects.
Obviously, it's a pretty sobering kind of moment to see that footage or to hear that scene even. And, in that scene, I was actually describing that case. And I remember, Laura, actually the moment when that case happened, we were here in the office, you and I, it was like early one morning in this case, which was one of the fastest cases in the history of the Exodus Road, was just about to really take off. Law enforcement were going to begin to act. And there's a lot of humanity that's felt in that moment. And I wonder if you might even just reflect with me back on, what was it like to be sitting in the room? What were you thinking about? Take us back into that case as it unfolded.
Yeah, that was a really special one. We were here, I don't think it was 6 something, and in the morning, and we were in the ops room, and we were watching things unfold, and we were in close communication with the team. And I think there are these two parts of my head and my heart in those operations.
Yeah.
I think, my head is focused around, okay, what are the risks to those involved, both the survivors and the law enforcement and our own teams, and have we thought through the mitigation of those risks? And there's this tensity of kind of sitting on the edge of your seat, just kind of sick to your stomach a little bit, like hoping that things will go well and will go according to plan. And I think at the end of the day, there's so many things that can go wrong on every single case. And I think paramount is people's safety. And so I think that is definitely the leading thought or concern or worry in my mind. But then I think the other part is just the heart side, which is the humanity side. And I think about what in real time as something is happening in a location far away from me. What are these young women experiencing when law enforcement storms into their place,
their everyday world,
their everyday world, and what's the fear that they feel and the panic that they feel. And I think about the law enforcement, so many times law enforcement have to overcome so much just to get to the point of a successful mission or operation. And what are they experiencing? And then
what is their personal risk?
What is their personal risk, right? And professional risk sometimes too, if there's corruption involved. And then I think about our own teams, obviously, and I know these people by name, and they are part of the Exodus Road community, and they have sacrificed so much to be in this moment in time. And I think about their families and their spouses and their kids and their own mental health and what this particular operation, how it might impact them. And I think for this particular operation, Matt was the lead investigator. And so he was there. And I just remember specifically watching as we did video calls throughout leading up to that particular operation. And then right after, he just looked tireder and tireder and tireder and tireder. And he was just exhausted. And I think in that moment, it was somehow holding the tension of all of those, of the things that could go wrong from both a human perspective and a risk mitigation organizational perspective.
Well, and here we are, like, halfway around the world watching dots on a screen move, right?
Yeah.
And that's the real-time glimpse that we have into it, is these dots on a screen, and we're trying to interpret, like, if that's good or bad movement, or like what it means. And of course, it's like the whole time you're just hoping beyond hope that like everything's going to plan.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's just, you're just on the edge of your seat. We talk a lot about that quote from Theodore Roosevelt, The Man in the Arena. And it feels like we just get this privilege of watching these brave men and women go into the arena in these operations, and they're marred by dust and sweat and blood, but we get to watch in real time, which is such an honor and such a gift, and also at the same time so incredibly terrifying.
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And in that particular story, the case unfolds and everyone was safe.
Yeah.
2 establishments raided at the same time, immensely complex. Over 30 women removed from the establishments. And you celebrate those moments, and yet, you celebrate them even more because of how sweet they are, because of how many don't go to that plan. So,
and it's the biggest exhale imaginable.
Right. Right. I wonder, as we think about this documentary, Stolen Lives, and the other voices featured, and one that we haven't yet talked about is Brandy, who is a sweet survivor, friend, and advocate of ours here at the Exodus Road. She's a Coloradan and is not very far from our office. What is it like to know Brandy, to see her as she kind of extends this hand backwards and then we'll give the audience a chance to listen in as Brandy tells part of her story directly.
Yeah, you know, Brandy is incredible. And I think she's incredible because, again, she has chosen, just like Brandon has chosen, not to transfer her pain, but to transform it, to use it to transform the lives of other vulnerable women around her. And, you know, I think the courage it takes to be vulnerable and to share your story and the grit it takes to be able to be at a place where you have walked through your own healing to where you can have the courage to share your story publicly is massive. And it's, I think there is nothing like someone who has lived a trauma, lived that type of abuse. There's nothing like hearing directly from that person.
Yeah.
The value of that, the power of that to other people. It, you know, I'm not, because I'm not a human trafficking survivor, there are limits to how I can inspire or encourage other vulnerable women or men or boys and girls around the world who might be trapped in that situation or might have lived through that situation.
Yeah.
But that limit is not placed on other survivors. And the survivors that are in a place that they can become voices and can use their experience to lift others up, to shine a light on this issue, it's absolutely remarkable. And it's really inspiring. You know, it's another group of people that are in the arena in this work in ways that are really,
that only they,
really
in ways
powerful.
only they can bring.
Only they can bring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I mean, you said it best. It's really, there's nothing like hearing directly from survivors. So let's take a look. Let's listen to what Brandy has to share.
I was staying with a friend, and that friend was like, let's go to Reno. We checked in. She said that she was gonna go get our bags after we got to the room. After she left, somebody was knocking on the door. That's when he entered my life. I thought it was one of her friends, but he turned out to be a pimp.
Unfortunately,
You do a lot of, you know, should I run? Should I stay? I'm scared. So the first few days, he beat you within an inch of your life so that you're too scared to leave. I wasn't like bringing in as much money. I wasn't trying anymore. And he would beat you when you got home or back to the hotel. So I got into his phone and turned on his location and sent it to some of my ex's friends. By the time that they got there and they pulled up and I just ran. Every time I have shared my story, there's always somebody that says it's happened to them too, but I just want to help others and raise awareness in the situation.
Brandy's story really ends triumphantly because of her own resolve as a survivor. Her willingness to say, I will not stand for this in my own life. I will do anything that I can to escape this. She took that back into her control, wrenched it away from the trafficker that was exploiting her, and now stands on the other side, thriving, and not thriving for her own need, but thriving so that she can actually turn back and extend a hand to other survivors.
I love that Brandy gave us this opportunity to kind of hear from and see this glimpse into what it is like to be a survivor here in the United States specifically. And I know, you know, we as an organization have been really growing in our response to the issue of human trafficking here in the US in really profound ways over the last few years. If you've been a part of our community, you've probably heard us talk all about like our prevention education work. And I want to take this opportunity. We're sitting with the CEO of the Exodus Road. Laura, will you share a little bit about what the Exodus Road's response to human trafficking in the US looks like and perhaps even what's on the horizon?
Yeah, you know, Preston, you've been very involved in this project, but, you know, when we started seeing that over 70% of all of our cases had that social media online component, we really started asking ourselves, okay, this is a unique vulnerability for kids and vulnerable populations right here in the US. And we had done prevention education work in other communities in Asia, for example, that were specific to what that community was struggling with vulnerability to human trafficking. And when we started really looking at 4 years ago now, I guess, the marriage of our own cases saying and pointing to the
Yeah.
fact that so much of this crime was happening online, and
The data from other places, right?
the data from other places.
It's like that Spider-Man meme. Have you ever seen like the 3 Spider-Men and they're all pointing at each other? And it's
Yes.
like
Yes.
identical. It's like
Totally. Yeah.
that kind of moment.
Yeah,
was
it was
like,
that kind of moment.
yeah.
And, you know, I have an education background. And so I have a real heart for what does it look like to be in schools and in front of kids as they're learning and developing their own resiliency skills. And so that's why we developed our prevention education program addressing digital safety called Influenced,
Yeah.
which has since gotten federal funding, which we're so
Yeah.
excited about in Colorado, also in Pennsylvania. And so that funding has allowed us to really implement pretty aggressively over the last few years. And
Yeah.
we've learned so much about what kids are really facing online. And I think one of the things that has been sobering to us is we knew it was bad, but as we're getting the data and the surveys that are coming back from doing this project and this program in schools around the US, what we're seeing is that it's actually way worse than we even thought that it was.
Yeah.
You know, we did as you know, we did a program in a health class here in Colorado. And, you know, it had 95 kids in the class and they reported 105 instances of online predation
Yeah.
in
right.
one class.
Right.
And so we're really, really passionate about that because I think this space is so complex
Right.
and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of resources
Yep.
to equip us to really combat it in a criminal area and with tech, with laws. All of that is going to take time. And so we just believe if we can get in front of it, we
Yeah.
can help students and families protect themselves. And that actually is a really smart way to fight the rise of exploitation.
And we've talked, you know, I think I actually talked with Matt on the podcast a little bit about this idea that, you know, for so long, we did a really great job in America at addressing like protecting kids in physical neighborhoods. So I remember as a kid in the 90s, like, you know, just growing up with like the DARE program and knowing like stranger danger language and like all of these things. And I think where we've really have ground to make up is in understanding that those physical neighborhoods have really moved online. And like, that's where the majority of our kids are spending their time, and the protections for them in those spaces have not caught up. And it's going to take an absolute like coalition of people involved. And it's going to take, you know, parents, but it's going to take anybody who has kids in their life involved in really intentional and, just focused ways.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a parent of 3, and the most difficult thing that I would say I've had to navigate as a parent, especially as my kids got into middle school and older, was how do you navigate the digital world in their spaces? And I think parents really have got to pay attention, and it is not something that we can just ignore, you know. And I think when you have kids that are spending 8.5 hours a day online on average, and those kids are also described and defined as the loneliest generation, and then you add into that formula a massive influx of predators who exploit
Sexualized
them,
content,
you
grooming.
just have a recipe for disaster. You know, it's not just one guy in one white van in a whole community. It's like 1,000 white vans in digital neighborhoods that are opening their doors and offering candy to our kids. And we have to be paying attention to it. So I think for us and for me personally as a mom, it's one of the reasons I'm really passionate about our program addressing that very thing.
And if we're listening, our kids are crying out and asking that we help them address it. I think that's the really unique thing is like, as we've sat across from young people, I hear so often this like level of maturity from them that says, oh my gosh, this is not the world that we want to live in. We actually really want this to change. Help us change this. And Influence becomes this great mechanism for facilitating that kind of change for facilitating healthy conversations about the world that we want to create that doesn't exist at the moment. I think, you know, as someone who's been in this work for, I guess, a little over 6 years now, and to sit across from someone who's been in this work for a decade and a half, there's a real truth to this belief that it's costly. There is a measure of overwhelm, just to use the kind of phrase that I said in the documentary. There's a measure of overwhelm when you consider what we're up against. So what is it? I'm going to ask you, this is like the Laura Parker question. What is it that gives you hope in this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think, especially in the anti-human trafficking sector, full-time nonprofit work, you have to be pretty serious about hope, because it is too hard if you don't have a pretty white-knuckled grip on what your purpose is that keeps you going. And I think for me, I really think of two things. I think of the individual and the human dignity that we get to participate in giving back.
Yeah, helping to restore.
Helping to restore.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about the huge numbers, or I think about systemic change or cultural change, that is all very encouraging, but it's slower and it's harder to wrap your head and heart and mind around. But I think when I think about the one, and I think about the individual survivor at Freedom Home, or I think about, you know, the
Valentina.
case story, Valentina, or I think about a case story that I read just last week about a survivor that got to go back home to her family. I think about those individuals and I think, okay, we have an opportunity at some level to give some dignity back to them. They were treated, they were bought, sold, exploited, treated like a commodity, and we got to say, no, actually, you're a human being, and as a human being, you deserve dignity and freedom.
And you have such power.
And you have such power.
Yeah.
And that work, wow, that is
it.
magnetic.
That's it.
That is magnetic. Yeah. And then I think the other thing I really think about is I oftentimes will go back and I'll think about the hope that I see played out in the arena, because I just see so many people continuing to step into that arena to great cost to themselves. And it's not an empty arena. There are so many different people that are in there fighting for this work. You know, it's advocates and survivors and donors who are giving generously, and our frontline investigators and our social workers, and so many people, other nonprofits,
college students writing papers about it.
Papers. I mean, there's so much good happening, and I think the fact that we get to participate in the arena because we're in there fighting. Yeah. We definitely have blood and sweat and tears on us.
Got a couple scars. Got a couple scars
too, for sure. But it's the fact that you look side by side and we're not out here by ourselves doing it. There are a lot of incredible, remarkable people that are swinging swords right alongside us.
You know, I say it, I think in the doc, but it's this idea that you can look out at the issue and just simply say, it's too much. I can't do it. Can't do it alone. Or you can realize, I can't do it alone, but I can roll up my sleeves and I can link arms with you and with you and with you. And together we might be able to make a difference for the one. And that might actually make a difference for the hundreds and the thousands, and leave this lasting impact on this issue that initially felt far too dark to make any difference within.
That's so well said.
It's a great gift to be able to do this work. So that said, we've given you this glimpse into something that we're really proud of at its core, which is this documentary. It's called Stolen Lives, let me get this right. It's called Stolen Lives, America's Human Trafficking Crisis. It's available for streaming, and it'll continue to be rebroadcast on Newsmax Plus. And we'd be honored if you would just take some time to watch it. It's a great glimpse into this work that the Exodus Road is doing, and really, truly, this coalition of voices around the country that are bringing resolve to this fight. Any last words from you, Laura?
Yeah, I think please watch it. It takes an hour, and I know an hour might feel like a long time, but hey, you made it through the end of this podcast. So
Yeah.
you do have some
That's
time.
right. And Ted Lasso is not back yet. So
right. So
get it
you
done.
have,
No.
that's right. And I know it feels heavy to watch, like at a human level, right? It feels heavy to watch a documentary on human trafficking. But if you can give us an hour, you will understand the human trafficking crisis in America exponentially more. And I think my challenge to you would be, as you're watching it, to ask yourself, what is my next right step? What's my next right thing?
Yeah. Right.
You don't have to solve all of it,
Yeah.
but you do have to do one thing. Just do one thing and
Yeah.
ask yourself, what's my one thing? And then just do that thing, whether it's, there's a million different things you could do.
Research human trafficking in your city or in your
Yes.
region.
Yeah.
Look up and see if there's a nonprofit contributing to the response. There's so many great next steps.
So many things you could do. You could check out our Parent Academy
Yeah.
at Influenced
Yep.
and learn about how to protect kids in your life. You could talk to your kids about technology and online exploitation. So many different things you could do. But I would say just do something.
Yeah.
And then after you do that one something, then ask yourself, what's the next
thing?
right thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the next right thing?
That's right. Well, Laura, thanks. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, if you're listening to this has been a little bit of a fun, kind of different episode on the Until All Are Free channel. And we'll have you back again soon on a totally different topic, Laura. But it's been a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Absolutely. It's always an honor, Preston Goff.
All right. This has been Until All Are Free. I'm your host, Preston Goff. This podcast is produced by The Exodus Road, a global anti-human trafficking nonprofit organization with a vision for a world where no human is ever bought, sold, or exploited. If you're curious to learn more about what it's like to fight human trafficking worldwide, to hear from investigators on the front lines of this issue, to hear from trauma-informed aftercare professionals, to hear from survivors themselves, you can learn more about all of our work by visiting theexodusroad.com. We're also at The Exodus Road on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Threads, Twitter, all the major things. If this episode moved you, I want to invite you to share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And of course, you can find and follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes come out every other Friday. And one last thing, if you've not had a chance to join our community on social media, we have new Until All Are Free social channels on Instagram, on TikTok, and on YouTube. And it's a space where I'm regularly posting clips from these episodes, but also behind the scenes content and teasers of what's coming next. I'm even polling and working with the community there to really determine what the next stories that we're going to cover on Until All Are Free look like. So if you want to have a voice in that and help shape the future of this podcast, I'd invite you to come and join us there. Just search Until All Are Free podcast on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. Until next time, thanks for listening.